rabies, tuberculosis, and botulism. They are essential for our health. Without their heroics, these diseases contaminate water sources, creating a knock-on effect that threatens both our lives and our animal compatriots' lives. You can think of pack of feral dogs, rats, and less efficiently consumed carcasses. How would your local environment look and smell if the garbage disposal team disappeared also? An African safari tour would not be quite the same with hundreds of unconsumed carcasses around.
A vulture in his lifetime does an ecosystem service, what we call an ecosystem service, worth over $11,200 in his lifetime. You could imagine how many vultures are doing that, and you can imagine what it will accrue to the economy of a country. So they play a vital role. But because we think that, oh, they are just there scavenging, we don't know what they do for us. Actually, they do a lot for us.
However, the harsh reality is vultures are vanishing at alarming rates. They are poisoned, persecuted, and electrocuted. Their habitats are degraded and their chicks starved. The human race have intentionally and inadvertently killed thousands of vultures in Africa, Asia, and beyond. In just 30 years, vulture numbers in West Africa have declined by 95% outside protected areas. Over the same period, more than half of the vulture population in Kenya's Masai Mara have gone. Today, 75% of Old World vultures are slipping toward extinction. Hooded vultures, traditionally widespread living alongside humans, have declined by 62% across Africa since the 90s, and much more rapidly in some areas. Only about 100 pairs of bearded vultures are left in South Africa, having reduced from about 200 pairs 20 to 30 years ago. 52% declined over a 30-year period in Egypt's vulture numbers and Masai Mara ecosystem. And most important areas for vultures in East Africa. Together, threats from poisoning and trade in traditional medicines account for 90% of reported vulture deaths in Africa. Worldwide, vultures are considered one of the most threatened groups of birds. Africa supports 11 vulture species. 8 are confined to the continent. The rest are migrant. 7 of these vultures are on the edge of extinction, categorized as globally endangered or critically endangered by BirdLife, as the authority for birds on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List of Threatened Species. In 2015, BirdLife International, a conservation group, carried out an assessment and found that 6 of Africa's 11 vulture species were at risk of extinction. Deliberate targeting by poachers is one of the reasons, as the birds, which circle the sites where they feed, can alert authorities to the carcasses of illegally slain animals. Poisoning vultures for traditional African medicine also is taking a toll. When researchers who investigated why the vultures of Cameroon were disappearing found that the demand for vulture parts for traditional African medicine in Nigeria was so strong that it had nearly wiped out several species. Nigerians were turning to the neighboring countries of Cameroon, Niger, Benin, Chad, and Sudan to buy vultures, most of which are killed by poisoning. The use of vultures in traditional medicine is limited mostly to West Africa.
They've been hunted. Sometimes they are hunted for food. Sometimes they are hunted for what we call the belief-based practice. Sometimes they are hunted for different reasons. But basically, the two major drivers are belief-based practices, and we have for food. Sometimes some people warn you, if you're traveling along some routes in Nigeria, you should be careful what meat you buy in the name of chicken you buy on the road, because you may just be eating a species of vulture instead of chicken.
Nigeria formerly hosts 7 species of vulture. They are Egyptian vulture, hooded vulture, white-backed James africanus, white-headed vulture, Rupert's griffon, palm nut vulture, and lappet-faced vulture. 5 of these species in Nigeria have a highly vulnerable status and have even gone locally extinct in some parts of the country. The only species that seem to be thriving in the country are the hooded vulture and palm nut vulture. According to the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, following a recent study on the current status of vulture in Nigeria, results indicated that their distribution ranges have been severely restricted over the past 20 to 30 years, as vultures are no longer sighted where they once thrived in huge numbers.
They are hard to come by these days. The one that you can find easily these days are the hooded vulture. And I tell you what, the hooded vulture, the decline was so dramatic that at the point in time it was least concern. It was listed under the IUCN Red List as least concern. Within a few years, it jumped from least concern to critically endangered, to show you how the remarkable decline has happened within just short time. So it's something that we need to call people's attention to, and so that we will be aware of the harm that we are doing. It may not eventually affect us, but it's going to affect the generation after us. There are no environmental sanitizers who will clean up the environment of diseases. We're exposing the future generation to a situation where we will not find, they will not have the biological control in terms of those diseases.
Nigeria is a biologically diverse country with good patches of lowland rainforest in the south to semi-desert in the extreme north. As a result of this, there is much of interest for the birder to see. Over the last 3 decades, Nigeria has witnessed unprecedented destruction of its natural resources so that less than 3% of the original rainforest cover now remains, and large areas of savanna woodland in the north have been converted into farmlands. With a growing population of over 130 million people, the pressures are unlikely to abate, so that the future survival of the country's fauna resources is likely to be dependent on the maintenance of its 8 national parks and the various game and forest reserves throughout the country. The national parks cover an area of just over 22,000 square kilometers, about 2.5% of the country. So there is a pressing need to upgrade some of the other reserves into parks to ensure that all habitat types are adequately protected within the park system. Unfortunately, most forests and game reserves throughout the country receive little or no protection, so they are being destroyed at an alarming rate. Even in the national parks, poaching levels are a matter of concern, although the habitat in the parks has been largely spared to destruction elsewhere. The poaching pressures throughout Nigeria have led to the demise of many of the larger birds in Nigeria. Apart from birds, it is now almost impossible to see any large mammal outside of the national parks. So if the country is to retain a representative selection of its fauna resources, it is imperative to ensure that the parks are totally protected.